Alarm screamed. Richard Caldwell's body convulsed. Machines beeped frantically. 20 doctors shouted orders, but nothing was working. His hand twitched, pointing at something invisible. Then she saw it, a tiny, deadly bite, almost invisible. A mark that could have been ignored. Everyone doubted her. A cleaning woman. Standing there, frozen yet certain, knowing something the experts didn't. She stepped forward. What she did next didn't just save a life. It exposed greed, deception, and a calculated attempt to kill a billionaire. To understand how it came to this moment, we have to start at the very beginning. I'm worth $3 billion, and not one of you can tell me why I'm dying. Richard Caldwell said those words on a Tuesday morning in the most expensive hospital wing in Manhattan. By Tuesday night, he could barely whisper. By Wednesday, he couldn't speak at all. 20 doctors cycled through his room over the next 72 hours. Specialists with credentials longer than grocery receipts. Men and women who'd spent decades memorizing every disease, disorder, and dysfunction the human body could produce. And every single one of them walked out confused. Richard lay in a bed that cost more per day than most people's rent, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and tracked every function his body was losing control of. His skin had gone gray. His breathing sounded wet and wrong. His eyes, when they opened at all, looked terrified. Outside his room, his family wasn't grieving. They were planning. His nephew Blake leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone, refreshing stock prices every 30 seconds. His sister-in-law Victoria had her attorney on speed dial and wasn't shy about using it. His younger brother stood by the massive window overlooking Central Park, probably mentally redecorating the penthouse he'd inherit. Not one of them had held Richard's hand since he got sick. The medical team gathered in the hallway for what felt like the 100th time. Dr. Patricia Reeves, head of internal medicine, and the kind of woman who could diagnose rare diseases in her sleep, looked like she hadn't slept in days. His liver is failing, but it's not cirrhosis or hepatitis, she said, her voice tight with frustration. Kidneys shutting down, but there's no obstruction or infection. Heart rhythm all over the place, but structurally it's fine. Nothing makes sense. Tox screen came back clean 3 times, another doctor added. No drugs, no poisons, nothing unusual in his blood. Then we're missing something, Dr. Reeves snapped. We have to be. But nobody knew what. Inside the room, Richard's condition worsened. A nurse monitoring his vitals noticed the change first and called everyone back in. They rushed through the door with clipboards and confident voices that couldn't quite hide their panic. Blood pressure crashing. Oxygen saturation dropping. Prep for intubation. Richard's eyes flickered open. His mouth moved like he was trying to say something important, but only a horrible gurgling sound came out. His right hand lifted off the bed, shaking, reaching toward nothing in particular. Then it dropped. The machines went crazy. Alarms shrieked. Doctors barked orders at each other. Someone sprinted for the crash cart. And in the corner of the room, standing so still she practically blended into the walls, a woman in a gray cleaning uniform watched it all unfold. Her name tag said Nality. She'd been wiping down the bathroom when the chaos started. Hospital policy said custodial staff should clear out during medical emergencies. But something about the way Richard's hand had reached out, desperate and specific, like he was trying to show someone something, kept her frozen in place. She watched the doctors swarm, watched them inject medications and adjust equipment and shout medical terms at each other, watched Richard's family peek through the doorway with faces that looked more annoyed than heartbroken. After 9 minutes of chest compressions and emergency drugs, Dr. Reeves stepped back from the bed. Her shoulders sagged. She looked at the clock, then at her exhausted team, then down at the floor. Time of death. Wait. Nality's voice sliced through the chaos like a knife. Everyone turned. For a split second, they all seemed surprised to discover she was actually a person, and not just part of the furniture. Dr. Reeves's expression went cold. "Ma'am, you need to step out." His hand, Nality said firmly. She moved closer to the bed, pointing. "Look at his right hand. We're in the middle of a code. You can't just look at it." Something in Nality's tone made Dr. Reeves pause. She glanced down at Richard's hand, squinted. Her face shifted. Between his thumb and first finger, barely visible in the webbing of skin, was a tiny mark. Reddish, swollen, fresh. "That wasn't there yesterday," Nality said quietly. "I cleaned this room yesterday morning. That mark is new." Dr. Reeves bent closer. The mark was so small you'd miss it if you weren't looking. A puncture. Or maybe a bite. "Get me a scope," she ordered sharply. "Right now." A nurse scrambled to comply. The room went dead silent except for the flat, endless tone of the heart monitor. When Dr. Reeves examined the mark under magnification, her face drained of color. "Oh my God," she breathed. "It's a sting." "A what?" someone asked. "A sting. From something venomous. Something tiny enough we'd never spot it without looking directly at it." She spun to face her team, urgency flooding back into her voice. "Get anti-venin broad spectrum. And call toxicology back. Tell them to test for exotic neurotoxins. Now." The room exploded into action again. Orders flew. Equipment crashed. Nurses ran. And Nality stepped back into her corner, heart hammering in her chest, watching doctors finally fight the right battle. Richard's family crowded the doorway, their expressions tight with something that definitely was a relief. If you'd never sighed with greedy heirs waiting for death, subscribe right now. Only the heartless scroll past. Nality Becky had been invisible her entire life. Not literally, but close enough that it sometimes felt the same. Growing up in a Brooklyn neighborhood where people like her were either ignored or feared, she'd learned early that being unseen was safer than being noticed. Teachers called on other students. Store owners watched her like she might steal something. Employers hired her but never really saw her. By 31, she turned invisibility into something like armor. She worked the overnight shift at Cedar Springs Medical Center, the kind of hospital where rooms cost more than cars and patients arrived in private helicopters. She pushed her cleaning cart through hallways lined with original artwork, mop floors made of imported marble, and empty trash cans that probably cost more than her weekly paycheck. Doctors walked past her without acknowledgement. Nurses vented about their terrible dates while she scrubbed toilets, forgetting she had ears. Rich patients and their families discussed private matters, money, affairs, resentments, as if she couldn't understand English. Most of the time, Nality didn't care. Invisible meant overlooked. Overlooked meant safe. But invisible also meant she noticed things other people missed. Like how Richard's nephew always stood at least 6 feet from the bed, not out of fear, but impatience. Or how his sister-in-law's eyes turned cold and calculating whenever doctors mentioned words like recovery or rehabilitation instead of will and estate. Nality had cleaned rooms where people died surrounded by love. She'd seen families refuse to leave bedside even after nurses gently suggested they rest. She'd watched people sob over loved ones they'd never see again. Richard's family didn't look like that. They looked like people stuck in traffic, irritated by the delay. She'd first noticed Richard 5 days ago when he checked into the VIP wing. Unlike most patients up here, he'd made eye contact with her, actually smiled, said thank you when she emptied his trash. Most wealthy patients treated her like furniture. Richard treated her like a human being. He asked her name on the second day, asked where she was from, listened when she answered instead of just waiting for her to leave. "You work harder than half the people I employ," he told her once, and he wasn't joking. He meant it. Then he got sick. Fast. Brutally. And now, standing in the corner while doctors rushed to save him, Nality understood something that made her stomach hurt. She might be the only person in this entire building who actually wanted him to survive. His family hovered near the doorway, whispering calculations to each other. One of them checked the time, like Richard dying was just an appointment running late. Naledi's hands curled into fists inside her latex gloves. She'd been invisible her whole life. Maybe that was about to change. Naledi's mother used to say that knowledge was the one thing poverty couldn't steal. Dr. Thandai Mbeki had been a general practitioner in Johannesburg before everything fell apart. Their home, small but filled with light, had shelves crammed with medical textbooks, anatomy guides, pharmacology manuals, disease encyclopedias with photographs that fascinated and terrified young Naledi in equal measure. "Come here, baby," her mother would say after dinner, patting the couch beside her. "Let me show you something beautiful." Beautiful, to Dr. Mbeki, was the human cardiovascular system, the intricate network of nerves, the way the body fought infection like a microscopic war. Naledi absorbed it all. By age 10, she could identify symptoms of common illnesses. By 12, she understood how medications worked in the bloodstream. By 14, she was reading her mother's medical journals, asking questions that made Dr. Mbeki beam with pride. "You're going to be a doctor," her mother told her once, stroking her hair. "A better one than me." Naledi believed her. Then her father got sick. Cancer, aggressive and merciless. The treatments drained their savings in months. Dr. Mbeki worked double shifts, then triple, sacrificing sleep and health to pay for chemotherapy that barely bought time. When he died, he left them with nothing but debt and grief. Dr. Mbeki kept working, but something inside her had broken. She stopped smiling, stopped talking about the future, started making mistakes at work, small ones at first, then bigger ones that got her suspended, then fired. They moved to New York when Naledi was 16, chasing the myth of American opportunity. What they found instead was a tiny apartment in Brooklyn, bills that never stopped coming, and jobs that paid just enough to keep them hungry. Dr. Mbeki took work as a home health aide, washing bodies she used to heal, administering medications she used to prescribe. The light in her eyes died a little more each day. "Don't end up like me," she told Naledi on her 18th birthday. "Promise me you'll do something better." Naledi promised. But promises don't pay for medical school. Neither do minimum wage jobs or student loans that require a credit history she didn't have. Her mother died 2 years later. Heart attack. Quick and brutal. Naledi found her on the bathroom floor, already cold. At the funeral, which only 3 people attended, Naledi made a different kind of promise. She'd keep learning, keep studying. She'd memorize every medical textbook she could get her hands on, even if she'd never wear a white coat or have doctor before her name. The public library became her classroom. Free online courses became her professors. Medical websites and journals became her curriculum. She worked overnight shifts at the hospital, the closest she could get to medicine without a degree, and spent her days studying the things her mother had taught her to love. Most people saw a maid when they looked at her. Naledi knew she was more than that. She just needed someone else to see it too. Standing in Richard Caldwell's room, watching doctors pump antivenin into his veins, she wondered if this was finally her chance. Would you keep learning if the world told you to give up? Think about that. The antivenin didn't work. For 6 hours, Richard seemed to stabilize. His heart rate evened out. His breathing improved slightly. Dr. Reeves allowed herself a small, cautious smile and told the family there was reason for hope. By midnight, hope was gone. Richard's speech turned to slurred nonsense. His left arm stopped responding to commands. His liver enzymes, which had started improving, suddenly spiked higher than before. The medical team reconvened in the hallway, their exhaustion turning to desperation. The antivenin should have worked, Dr. Reeves said, flipping through test results that made no sense. If it was a sting from a known venomous species, we'd see improvement by now. Unless it's not a known species, someone suggested. Then what is it? Where did it come from? How did it get into a locked hospital room on the 15th floor? Nobody had answers. Just more questions that led nowhere. Inside the room, Richard's decline accelerated. His skin took on a bluish tint. His fingers started twitching, small, involuntary movements that looked almost like tremors. His eyes, when they opened, seemed unfocused and distant, like he was staring at something nobody else could see. The machines tracking his vital signs told a story of systematic failure. His kidneys had essentially quit. His liver was drowning in toxins it couldn't process. His heart kept beating, but weakly, like it was running on fumes. 20 specialists had examined him now. Toxicologists, neurologists, infectious disease experts, even a hematologist who specialized in rare blood disorders. They'd ordered every test modern medicine had to offer, and they still had no idea what was killing him. Could it be autoimmune? One doctor proposed. His body attacking itself. Doesn't match any autoimmune presentation I've ever seen. Prion disease? Too fast. Prion take months or years. Some kind of engineered toxin? From who? How? They talked in circles, throwing out diagnoses and shooting them down just as quickly. Meanwhile, Richard's billion-dollar fortune sat useless in bank accounts that couldn't buy him a single normal breath. Money could get you the best hospital room, the top specialists, the newest equipment. But it couldn't make them magically know what was wrong when the answer refused to reveal itself. Richard tried to speak once, around 2 in the morning. His mouth moved with obvious effort, forming shapes that might have been words. Dr. Reeves leaned close, straining to hear. All that came out was a wet, rattling gasp. "It's okay," she told him, though it clearly wasn't. "We're going to figure this out." But her eyes told a different story. She was running out of ideas and running out of time. Richard's hand lifted slightly off the bed, that same desperate reaching motion from before. This time, though, his fingers curled and uncurled slowly, like he was trying to grab hold of something that kept slipping away. His family, watching from a hallway, checked their phones and whispered about lawyers. Blake Caldwell stood outside his uncle's room with his phone pressed to his ear, discussing real estate like he was planning a vacation instead of a funeral. "The Fifth Avenue property alone is worth $200 million, he said, his voice low, but not quite quiet enough. "If we liquidate the tech holdings before the market gets wind of his condition, we could walk away with—" "Blake." Victoria cut him off with a sharp look. "Not here." "Why not?" "He can't hear us." Blake gestured toward Richard's room with his free hand. "He's basically gone already." Victoria glanced around to make sure no nurses were listening, then stepped closer to her nephew. "Basically gone isn't legally gone. We need to wait for the doctors to make it official." "How long is that going to take?" "They've been saying any moment now for 2 days." "These things take time. Time we're wasting." Blake's jaw tightened. "Do you know how much value the company loses every day he's incapacitated? Investors are getting nervous. The board is asking questions." "Let them ask. Once the will goes through probate." "Once the will goes through, we're fighting Marcus for control," Blake interrupted. "Unless we move first." Marcus Caldwell, Richard's younger brother, leaned against the wall nearby, pretending not to listen. But Nality, mopping the floor 10 feet away, saw his expression change, saw his hand tighten around his coffee cup. The family had split into factions before Richard's body was even cold. Blake and Victoria wanted to sell everything and divide the cash. Marcus wanted to keep the company and run it himself. Richard's ex-wife, who'd arrived that afternoon with her attorney, wanted to contest the prenup. None of them wanted Richard to recover. Oh, they said the right things when doctors were around, talked about hoping for the best and praying for miracles. But the second medical staff walked away. The masks came off. "I give him 6 hours, Blake muttered, checking his watch. 12 at most." "Don't be ghoulish," Victoria said, but she didn't disagree. Marcus finally spoke up from his spot against the wall. "You two are disgusting." "Oh, please," Blake shot back. Don't act like you're not counting the zeros too. At least I'm not celebrating while he's still breathing. Neither are we. We're being realistic. Naledi's hands tightened around her mop handle. She kept her head down, kept moving, kept playing invisible. But inside, her stomach churned with anger, so sharp it almost made her dizzy. If betrayal disgusts you, hit subscribe, because only backstabbers would stay silent. Richard deserved better than this. Better than family, who saw him as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. And if the doctors couldn't save him, maybe someone else could. Naledi had cleaned Richard's room 4 times since the crisis started, and each time she noticed something new. The doctors were looking at machines and test results. They were focused on numbers and scans and lab work that told them what was happening inside Richard's body. But they weren't looking at Richard himself. Naledi was. She saw the way his lips quivered even when he was unconscious, tiny tremors that came and went in waves. She noticed how his fingernails had turned faintly blue at the edges, not from lack of oxygen like the doctors assumed, but from something else. Something that made the blue spread in strange patterns, like watercolor bleeding across paper. His fingers had started to stiffen too. Not the normal stiffness of someone lying still for days, but a different kind of rigidity. When nurses moved his arms to change bedding, his joints resisted in ways that didn't look natural. And then there was his right hand, the one with the mark. The doctors had examined the sting site, tested it, photographed it. Then they'd moved on, satisfied they'd found the culprit. But Naledi kept looking at it every time she cleaned. The mark was changing, spreading. Thin red lines radiated from the puncture like tiny veins, branching outward in a pattern that looked almost deliberate. She'd seen something like it before, years ago, in one of her mother's old medical journals. The memory hit her while she was emptying the bathroom trash. She froze, the bag dangling from her hand, her mind racing backward through time. She'd been 15, sitting on the apartment floor in Johannesburg, flipping through her mother's textbooks, while Dr. Mbeki cooked dinner. There'd been a section on venomous creatures, snakes, spiders, insects. And one particular entry had stuck with her because the photographs were so strange. A bite that caused spreading red lines, tremors, organ failure, blue discoloration under the nails. She couldn't remember the name, couldn't remember the exact details. But she remembered the feeling of reading it, the eerie fascination of learning about something so dangerous and rare that most doctors would never encounter it in their entire careers. She needed to find that journal, needed to confirm what her gut was screaming at her. But all her mother's books were gone, sold off or thrown away after she died, because Naledi couldn't afford to keep them in her tiny studio apartment. The public library might have medical archives, or maybe she could search online during her break, find the information somehow. Because if she was right, if this was what she thought it was, then the doctors were treating Richard for the wrong thing. And every minute they wasted brought him closer to dying from something that might actually have a cure. Naledi stood in the supply closet on the 14th floor, her phone clutched in shaking hands, staring at a medical article she'd found after 20 minutes of frantic searching. There it was, the answer. She was almost certain. Latrodectus tridesmgutis, the Mediterranean black widow. Native to southern Europe and parts of Asia, but occasionally smuggled into the United States through exotic pet trades. Its venom caused neurological symptoms, organ failure, and a distinctive pattern of spreading erythema, red lines radiating from the bite site. The symptoms matched Richard's condition almost perfectly. But knowing the answer and doing something about it were two completely different things. Naledi's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mouth felt dry. Her mind raced through all the reasons she should keep quiet and go back to mopping floors. She was a custodian, not a doctor, not a nurse, not anyone with credentials or authority or any reason to be believed. If she spoke up, they'd laugh at her. Worse, they'd fire her. Security would escort her out of the building, and she'd never work in another hospital again. Word traveled fast in the medical community, and crazy Maid who interrupted a code wasn't exactly a recommendation. She needed this job, needed the health insurance that barely covered anything but was better than nothing, needed the steady paycheck that kept the rent paid and food on her table. And what if she was wrong? What if her memory was faulty, her research incomplete, her conclusion based on nothing more than wishful thinking, and a childhood spent reading books she barely understood? She'd look like a fool, an arrogant fool who thought she knew better than 20 specialists with decades of training. But what if she was right? What if Richard died because she stayed silent? What if the answer was sitting right there in her head, and she let him die because she was too afraid to risk her minimum wage job? Could she live with that? Naledi closed her eyes and saw her mother's face. Heard her voice from years ago, tired but firm. Knowledge is the one thing poverty can't steal. Dr. Mbeki had spent her last years washing patients who used to call her doctor. She died with nothing, no money, no respect, no recognition. But she'd never stopped believing that knowing things mattered, that truth had value even when the world refused to acknowledge it. Naledi had promised to be better, to do something that mattered. This was her chance. Maybe her only chance. She could stay invisible, stay safe, and watch Richard die knowing she might have saved him. Or she could risk everything. Her job, her dignity, her carefully constructed armor of invisibility. And try. Her hands stopped shaking. Her breathing steadied. She shoved her phone in her pocket, straightened her uniform, and walked out of the supply closet. The doctors were still gathered outside Richard's room, arguing about treatment options that weren't working. Dr. Reeves looked exhausted. The other specialists looked frustrated and defensive. Naledi walked toward them, her heart pounding, so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. This was either the bravest or stupidest thing she'd ever done. Maybe both. She opened her mouth to speak, and for the first time in her life, chose to be seen. He's being poisoned. Naledi's voice cut through the medical discussion like a gunshot. Every head turned. 12 pairs of eyes locked onto her. The cleaning woman who'd been standing quietly near the wall, now stepping forward like she had any right to interrupt. Dr. Reeves's expression went from confusion to irritation in half a second. "Excuse me." "The patient," Naledi said, forcing her voice to stay steady. "Richard Caldwell. He's being poisoned. You're treating him for the wrong thing." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then someone laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that broke the tension and gave everyone else permission to react. "Are you serious right now?" one of the younger doctors said, shaking his head. "Ma'am, this is a private medical consultation," Dr. Reeves said coldly. "You need to step back and return to your duties." "I know what it looks like." Naledi pushed forward, her pulse racing. The red lines spreading from the mark on his hand. The tremors. The blue discoloration under his nails. The way his organs are failing in sequence. It's not a random sting. It's venom from a Mediterranean black widow spider. The hallway went completely silent. Then Dr. Reeves laughed. Not a cruel laugh exactly, but the kind of exhausted, disbelieving sound someone makes when they've been awake for 36 hours and a janitor just told them how to do their job. "A black widow," she repeated slowly. "You think we missed a black widow spider bite?" "Not the common North American species," Naledi said quickly. "The Mediterranean variant. Latrodectus tridisumgutus. It's rare here, but the symptoms match perfectly." "Where exactly did you get your medical degree?" another doctor interrupted. "Online? From a cereal box." A few people snickered. Naledi's face burned, but she didn't back down. "My mother was a doctor in South Africa. I grew up reading her medical journals. I've been studying medicine on my own for 15 years. "That's wonderful," Dr. Reeves said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Really, it's admirable that you read. But we are trained physicians with decades of combined experience, and we have run every test imaginable. If there was venom in his system, we would have found it. You tested for common neurotoxins, Nality countered. But Mediterranean black widow venom has a unique protein structure. You need specific antibodies to detect it. A standard tox screen won't show it. Security, Dr. Reeves said, not even looking at Nality anymore. Please escort this woman back to her station. Two security guards who'd been standing nearby moved forward. Nality's stomach dropped. Please, she said, desperation creeping into her voice. Just listen for 1 minute. We've listened enough, one of the specialists said. And frankly, this is insulting. You're a custodian. You have no medical training, no qualifications, and no business diagnosing patients. I know I'm just a cleaner, Nality said, her voice rising. I know I have no degree, no credentials, nothing that makes you think I'm worth listening to. But I also know I'm right. And if you don't test him for Mediterranean black widow venom specifically, he's going to die. Ma'am, let's go, one of the guards said, reaching for her arm. Nality jerked away. His family isn't mourning him. Did you notice that? They're fighting over his money before he's even gone. Someone could have planted that spider in his room. Someone who stands to inherit billions. Now you're accusing the family of attempted murder? Dr. Reeves's voice went sharp. Based on what? Your feelings. Based on the fact that rich people have been killed for their money since money existed. Nality shot back. And based on the fact that every symptom he's showing matches Mediterranean black widow envenomation, and you're too proud to admit a cleaning woman might know something you don't. The hallway exploded into overlapping voices. Doctors arguing with each other. Someone telling Nality to shut up. Someone else saying maybe they should at least consider. Enough. Dr. Reeves's voice cut through the chaos. She turned to face Nality directly, her eyes hard. You want us to test for this specific venom? Fine. We'll run the test. Not because I think you're right, but because I want you to see how wrong you are. And then you're going to apologize to this entire team, and you're going to be written up for this stunt. Nality's throat tightened. Okay. Yes. Run the test. Prove me wrong. But if I'm right, when I'm right, you're going to save his life. Dr. Reeves stared at her for a long, cold moment. Then she turned to one of the other doctors. Draw blood. Send it to toxicology with a specific request for Latrodectus treatisum guttus antibody detection. Let's put this nonsense to rest. The guards still had their hands on Nality's arms. She didn't resist as they started leading her away. She'd done what she could. Now all she could do was wait and pray she wasn't about to lose everything for nothing. They put Nality in a small, windowless office on the 3rd floor and told her to wait. No one explained if she was being detained, fired, or just kept out of the way. The security guards left her there with a cup of water and instructions not to leave until someone came to get her. Nality sat in a plastic chair that was slightly too small, staring at the beige walls, replaying every word she'd said in the hallway, second-guessing everything. What if she was wrong? She'd been so sure. The symptoms lined up perfectly. The spreading red lines, the neurological deterioration, the organ failure. It all pointed to Mediterranean black widow venom. But she was basing her diagnosis on a memory from when she was 15, on articles she'd skimmed during her break, on intuition and fragments of knowledge stitched together from stolen hours of learning. Real doctors didn't work that way. They had protocols, differential diagnoses, years of clinical experience. They'd probably considered and ruled out 1,000 possibilities she didn't even know existed. And she'd stood there in her gray custodial uniform, interrupting their meeting, telling them they were wrong, acting like she knew better. The humiliation was going to be spectacular. She'd be fired, definitely, probably blacklisted. She'd end up working retail or food service, answering to managers who cared even less about her than the hospital administration did. But a tiny, stubborn part of her brain kept circling back to Richard Hand, to those red lines, to the way his symptoms progressed. She'd seen something the doctors missed. She knew she had. The door opened. A hospital administrator walked in, middle-aged, balding, holding a tablet like it was a shield. "Miss Becky," he said, not sitting down. "I need you to understand the seriousness of what you did tonight." "I do." "You interrupted a medical team during a critical situation. You made unfounded accusations against a patient's family. You diagnosed a condition without any medical authority to do so." Naledi nodded. "Yes, sir." "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" She met his eyes. "I saw something everyone else missed. I spoke up because staying silent felt worse than getting fired. If I'm wrong, I'll accept whatever consequences you give me. But if I'm right, I saved someone's life." The administrator studied her for a long moment. "The blood test will take approximately 90 minutes to process." Dr. Reeves insisted on a rush. "Until then, you're suspended without pay pending the results." "I understand. If the test comes back negative, you'll be terminated immediately. If it comes back positive." He paused. "Well, we'll address that if it happens." He left without another word. Naledi sat alone in the silence, her heart hammering. 90 minutes. An hour and a half to find out if she'd just destroyed her life or saved one. She closed her eyes and thought about her mother. About all those nights reading medical journals together. About promises made and promises kept. "Please let me be right," she whispered to the empty room. "Please." Somewhere 15 floors above her, machines beeped steadily around Richard Caldwell's failing body. And in a lab across the building, a technician prepared to run a test that would change everything. Dr. Patricia Reeves was reviewing scans in her office when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer. It had been the longest week of her career, and she was running on coffee and spite at this point. But the caller ID showed the toxicology lab, so she picked up. "Dr. Reeves." "Patricia, it's Chun from Tox. You need to sit down." Something in his voice made her stomach drop. "What did you find?" The maid was right. For a second, Dr. Reeves forgot how to breathe. "What?" "The blood sample from Richard Caldwell. We tested specifically for Mediterranean Black Widow antibodies like you requested. The results came back positive. Strongly positive. His system is absolutely flooded with Latrodectus tridisum guttus venom." Dr. Reeves sat down hard in her chair. "That's not possible." "It's not just possible, it's definitive. We ran the test twice to be sure. The venom concentration is high enough that he must have been bitten within the last 72 hours, which matches his symptom timeline perfectly. But we searched his room. We've had eyes on him constantly since he was admitted. Where would a Mediterranean Black Widow even come from? They're not native to New York." "I can't answer that," Chin said. "But I can tell you that if you'd kept treating him for a generic neurotoxin, he'd be dead by morning. Mediterranean Black Widow venom requires a specific antivenin that's not part of standard protocols. We'll have to order it from." "Do it," Dr. Reeves interrupted. "Order it now. Whatever it costs, whatever strings you have to pull, get it here." "Already done. Should arrive within 3 hours via medical courier." Dr. Reeves ended the call and sat staring at her desk, her mind reeling. A custodian had just diagnosed something that 20 specialists missed. A woman with no medical degree, no credentials, no authority whatsoever had walked into their meeting and told them exactly what was wrong. And she'd been completely, undeniably correct. The implications were staggering. If Naledi was right about the venom, then everything else she'd said suddenly deserved consideration too, including the part about Richard being deliberately poisoned. Someone had put that spider in his room. Mediterranean Black Widows didn't just wander into locked hospital suites on the 15th floor. They had to be brought there, placed there, by someone who knew what they were doing. Dr. Reeves picked up her phone again and dialed security. "This is Dr. Reeves. I need you to seal Richard Caldwell's room immediately. No one goes in or out except essential medical staff. And I need surveillance footage from the VIP wing for the past 5 days. Is there a problem? There might be an attempted murder. Get me that footage. She hung up and headed for the 3rd floor, where a cleaning woman was sitting in a windowless office, probably convinced her life was over. Dr. Reeves had spent 30 years in medicine. She'd diagnosed rare diseases, saved countless lives, earned the respect of everyone in her field. She had plaques on her wall and letters after her name and a reputation built on being right. And tonight, she'd been wrong. Worse than wrong. She'd been arrogant, dismissive. She'd nearly let a patient die because she couldn't imagine that someone without a degree might know something she didn't. She walked faster, her jaw tight, already composing the apology she owed. Naledi Mbeki had just saved Richard Caldwell's life. Now it was time to figure out who tried to take it. Dr. Reeves opened the door to the 3rd floor office, and Naledi looked up with red-rimmed eyes that showed she'd been crying. The test came back positive. Dr. Reeves said quietly, "You were right. Mediterranean black widow venom. We're getting the specific antivenin now." Naledi's face crumpled with relief. She covered her mouth with both hands, tears spilling over. "He's going to live? If we get the antivenin in time, yes. Thanks to you." Dr. Reeves paused, the words clearly difficult. "I owe you an apology. We all do. You saved his life, and we tried to throw you out." Naledi stood up on shaky legs. "Can I see him? Actually, I need you to come with me. Security found something on the surveillance footage, and..." They were interrupted by shouting from down the hall. Both women turned as Blake Caldwell's voice echoed through the corridor, sharp with panic. "You're insane if you think I had anything to do with this." Dr. Reeves and Naledi rushed toward the sound. They found Blake surrounded by security guards outside Richard's room, his face flushed red, pointing an accusing finger at Naledi. "Her!" he shouted when he saw her approaching. "She's the one who poisoned him. She had access to his room. She had the chemicals. She's trying to frame me." Naledi stopped dead, her blood turning to ice. "That's absurd," Dr. Reeves said. "She's the one who identified the venom." "Exactly," Blake cut in, his voice dripping with false reason. "Isn't that convenient? She poisons my uncle, then swoops into play hero so no one suspects her. It's the perfect cover." Victoria appeared behind him, her face carefully neutral. "He has a point. She does have unrestricted access to all the rooms, and she'd know the cleaning schedule when no one would be watching. Why would I poison him?" Naledi's voice came out strangled. "I have no motive. I barely know him." "Don't you though?" Blake stepped closer, his eyes cold. "My uncle mentioned you to me once. Said you were smart and wasted cleaning floors. Maybe he promised you something. Money? A job? Then changed his mind and you decided to take revenge." "That's not, I never." Naledi couldn't get the words out. This was spinning out of control too fast. She knew exactly what kind of spider it was, Victoria added quietly, playing the reasonable voice. "Doesn't that strike anyone as suspicious? How would a cleaning woman know about rare Mediterranean spiders unless she'd researched them specifically for this?" One of the security guards shifted uncomfortably. Even Dr. Reeves looked uncertain for a moment. "I knew because I studied," Naledi said desperately. "Because I read medical journals. Because I actually paid attention to what was happening to him. Or because you knew what to look for since you're the one who planted the spider," Blake finished smoothly. He turned to the security guards. "Check her locker. Check her apartment. I guarantee you'll find evidence." "This is ridiculous," Dr. Reeves said, but her voice lacked conviction. Blake pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police. We'll let them sort this out. In the meantime, she shouldn't be anywhere near my uncle." Naledi's world tilted sideways. 5 minutes ago, she'd saved a man's life. Now she was being accused of trying to end it. The security guards moved toward her, their expressions apologetic but firm. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one of them said. "I didn't do anything," Nality whispered, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. Blake smiled, a cold, calculated expression that made Nality's stomach turn. He'd just flipped the entire narrative, turned her moment of triumph into a nightmare. And the terrifying part was that people were believing him. Comment, "I stand for justice," if you'd never side with liars like him. They didn't take Nality to the third-floor office this time. They brought her to a conference room on the 15th floor, right across from Richard's suite, and made her sit while Blake built his case. "Think about it logically," he said to the assembled doctors and security personnel. "Mediterranean black widow spiders don't just appear in New York hospitals. Someone had to bring it here. Someone with access." "Lots of people have access to that room," Dr. Reeves countered, but she sounded less certain than before. But only one person was in there every single day, unsupervised, with cleaning chemicals that could mask evidence. Blake's voice was smooth, practiced, like he'd been preparing this speech. Only one person conveniently discovered what 20 doctors missed. Nality sat with her hands clenched in her lap, her mind racing. How was this happening? How had saving someone's life turned into evidence against her? "I studied medicine my whole life," she said, forcing herself to speak clearly. "My mother was a doctor. I've been reading medical journals since I was a child. That's how I knew about the spider, not because I planted it." "So you say," Victoria chimed in, "but we only have your word for that." "Check my library records," Nality shot back. "Check my search history. I've been studying medicine for years. Ask anyone who knows me." "We will," one of the security guards said, making notes. Blake's expression flickered, just for a second, with something that might have been worry. Then the smooth mask returned. "Even if that's true, it doesn't prove innocence. It proves she had the knowledge to commit this crime." The room fell silent. Nality felt like she was drowning in quicksand. Every move to save herself just pulled her deeper. Dr. Reeves crossed her arms, studying Blake with narrowed eyes. "You seem awfully eager to deflect blame onto someone else. I'm protecting my family from a potential murderer." "Or protecting yourself." Blake's face went red. "How dare you?" "The surveillance footage," Dr. Reeves interrupted. "Security pulled it before all this started." "What did it show?" The head of security cleared his throat. "We're still reviewing it. But so far, we haven't found any evidence of Miss Becky doing anything suspicious." "Of course not," Blake said quickly. "She's careful. That's what makes her dangerous." Nality's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I didn't do this." "Then who did?" Blake demanded, spinning to face her. "Who else would have the knowledge, the access, and the motive?" The question hung in the air like poison. Nality met his eyes and saw something there that made her understand. Blake wasn't just deflecting. He was terrified, desperate, guilty. "Someone who stands to inherit $3 billion, she said quietly. Blake's face went pale. "You." "Someone who's been checking stock prices since his uncle got sick. Someone who hired attorneys before calling an ambulance. Someone who needs him dead." The room exploded into chaos. "Enough." Dr. Reeves's voice cut through the shouting. She turned to the security supervisor. "Show us the footage. All of it. Right now." They pulled up the surveillance recordings on a laptop, grainy black and white images from the hallway outside Richard's room. The timestamp started 4 days ago, when Richard first checked in. Everyone crowded around the screen, watching in fast forward. Doctors coming and going. Nurses checking vitals. Nality pushing her cleaning cart, entering the room for exactly 12 minutes, the standard time for a thorough clean. Nothing suspicious. Nothing out of place. "See," Blake said, his confidence returning. "She's good at covering her tracks." "Keep watching," the security supervisor said quietly. The timestamp jumped to 3 days ago. Late evening. The hallway was empty except for one figure approaching Richard's door. Blake Caldwell. He looked around before entering. A quick, nervous glance that made everyone in the conference room lean closer to the screen. He was inside for less than 2 minutes. When he came out, his hands were empty, but his body language screamed guilt. He walked fast, head down, checking over his shoulder twice. "I was visiting my uncle," Blake said quickly. "That's not a crime." "At 11 p.m.? Dr. Reeves asked. "When visiting hours ended at 9. I had a key card. Family privilege." "What were you doing in there for 2 minutes?" "Talking to him. Checking on him." He was sedated. A nurse spoke up. "I was on shift that night." He couldn't hold a conversation. Blake's jaw tightened. "I don't have to explain myself to." "Rewind it," Nality said suddenly. "Go back 30 seconds before he enters." The security supervisor complied. They watched Blake approach the door again, this time in slow motion. And there, Nality pointed at the screen. In Blake's right hand, barely visible in the grainy footage, was something small. A container of some kind. "Enhance that if you can," Dr. Reeves ordered. The image quality was terrible, but when the supervisor zoomed in and adjusted the contrast, the shape became clearer. A small plastic terrarium, the kind used to house insects or spiders. The room went silent. "That's not," Blake started, but his voice cracked. "That could be anything. You can't even see what's inside." "No," Dr. Reeves said slowly. "But we can test your car. Your home. If you purchased or transported a Mediterranean black widow spider, there will be traces. Venom residue. DNA. Something." Blake's face had gone from red to white. "This is entrapment. You're twisting innocent actions, too." "The police are already on their way," the security supervisor said, checking his phone. "They were called the moment we confirmed the poisoning. This footage will be part of their investigation." Victoria, standing in the corner, had gone very quiet. Her eyes darted between Blake and the door, calculating her own escape route. Nality finally allowed herself to breathe. The truth was coming out. Slowly, painfully, but inevitably. Justice was catching up. The police arrived 14 minutes later, 2 detectives in plain clothes, and 4 uniformed officers who moved with a kind of calm efficiency that suggested they'd done this 1,000 times before. Detective Maria Santos took one look at the surveillance footage and issued orders immediately. "Secure the room. No one enters or leaves. Get a warrant for his residence and vehicle." And someone read him his rights. Blake tried to run. He made it 3 steps toward the stairwell before 2 officers caught him. He actually fought, thrashing and shouting while they wrestled his arms behind his back. "Get off me. Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea what kind of lawyers I can afford?" "Yeah, you'll need good ones," Detective Santos said flatly. She nodded to her partner, who began reading Blake his Miranda rights while he struggled. "You have the right to remain silent. I want my attorney. Right now. You can't do this without. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. This is illegal. That footage doesn't prove anything. I'm being framed." Victoria edged toward the door. Detective Santos blocked her path without even looking. "Going somewhere, ma'am? I need to call my lawyer." "You can do that from a station. You're not under arrest yet, but I'd like to ask you some questions about your nephew's activities over the past week." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "I didn't know what he was planning. I swear I had no idea. Save it for the interview room." Blake was still shouting as the officers dragged him toward the elevator. His voice echoed down the hallway, raw with panic and rage. "She did this. The maid. She's the one who poisoned him. Check her records. She's lying about everything." Nality watched from the doorway of the conference room, her whole body shaking. Part relief, part delayed shock, part disbelief that this was actually happening. Dr. Reeves stood beside her. "Are you okay?" Nality nodded, not trusting her voice. "For what it's worth," Dr. Reeves said quietly, "I'm sorry. For doubting you. For almost letting him." She gestured toward the elevator, where Blake was still screaming obscenities. You saved a life tonight. Multiple lives, probably. Richard's and however many other people Blake would have hurt to protect his inheritance. The elevator doors closed, cutting off Blake's voice mid-sentence. The sudden silence felt heavy. Detective Santos approached them, her expression professional but not unkind. Miss Becky, I'll need a full statement from you. Everything you observed, everything that made you suspicious. Take your time, we'll need details. Of course, Nality managed. You did good work, the detective said. Most people wouldn't have spoken up, wouldn't have risked their job to help someone they barely knew. That took guts. Nality's eyes burned with tears she'd been holding back for hours. Is he going to be okay? Richard. The antivenin arrived 10 minutes ago, Dr. Reeves said. We've already started administration. His vitals are stabilizing. He should make a full recovery. Can I see him? Dr. Reeves hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. Then you need rest, and we need to do about 16 hours of paperwork explaining how a custodian saved a patient's life while the entire medical team stood around looking useless. They walked to Richard's room together. Inside, machines still beeped and hummed, but the sound felt different now. Less urgent. More like monitoring than emergency. Richard was unconscious, breathing through an oxygen mask, but his color looked better. The blue tinge was fading. The tremors had stopped. Nality stood at the foot of his bed, tears finally spilling over. I'm sorry I couldn't figure it out sooner. You figured it out when it mattered, Dr. Reeves said. That's what counts. They left Nality alone for a moment. She approached the bed slowly, looking at this man who'd treated her with kindness when kindness was rare, who'd seen her as a person when most people looked through her like glass. Thank you, she whispered, though he couldn't hear. For noticing me. For being decent. It made a difference. She turned to leave and found Marcus Caldwell standing in the doorway. Richard's younger brother, the one who'd stayed quiet while Blake and Victoria circled like vultures. You saved him, Marcus said simply. His eyes were red. My brother. You saved his life. I just saw something others missed. No. Marcus shook his head. You cared when his own family wanted him dead. That's not nothing. That's everything. He held out his hand. Nality shook it, feeling the weight of gratitude in his grip. Subscribe if you believe truth always wins. Only manipulators and traitors won't. Outside in the hallway, police processed evidence, and doctors filed reports, and the hospital machinery ground forward. But in that moment, standing in Richard Caldwell's room, Nality finally understood something her mother had tried to teach her years ago. Being seen wasn't about having credentials or authority or power. It was about refusing to stay silent when silence would let evil win. The antidote slid into his veins like a final gamble. In that room, every second felt stretched thin, like the world was holding its breath. Machines hummed. A single monitor beeped, steady, then shaky, then steady again. Doctors exchanged tense glances, whispering numbers under their breath. And there, at the center of it all, lay Richard Caldwell, the billionaire everyone thought was untouchable. His face, pale as ash, was a haunting contrast to the man who once commanded boardrooms with a glance. Minutes passed, then hours. Nothing certain. Nality stood frozen against the wall, her mop still leaning nearby, as if her world had collided into this one by accident. She had no title, no badge, no authority, just conviction. Conviction that had almost cost her freedom. Conviction that had nearly gotten her locked away for a crime she didn't commit. Her hands were clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. She prayed silently, not just for him, but for herself. Because if Richard Caldwell didn't make it through this night, she would forever be branded a liar. Heart rate stabilizing, a nurse whispered. Heads turned to the monitor. The irregular spikes were evening out. His chest, still a battlefield, now rose and fell with more rhythm. And then the impossible happened. Richard's lips parted. His breathing, shallow but present, filled the silence like thunder. His eyes fluttered. At first only whites, then focus. His gaze locked on the ceiling, wandering, confused, until they landed on her. On Nality, the maid who refused to stay invisible. His throat rasped, his voice cracked like glass. But the words carried the weight of truth, the kind no one in that room could deny. "You," he whispered, trembling, "saved me." The room froze. Doctors who had mocked her, nurses who had dismissed her, administrators who had called her insane. They all looked from him to her. The billionaire's acknowledgement was not just gratitude. It was testimony. It was vindication. For the first time, Nality's invisible presence filled the room like fire. She was no longer the janitor to be brushed aside. She was the reason a man who commanded empires still had breath in his lungs. But with his words came an unspoken question. If she saved him, who tried to kill him? Richard Caldwell, brother who had been quiet at the bedside, whispered into the silence. Nality was right all along. And that truth, spoken aloud, cracked the room wide open. The doctors shifted uncomfortably. Some stared at the floor. Others shook their heads, ashamed. The humiliation they had tried to pin on her now circled back like a curse. Yet in that storm, Nality did not gloat. Her face held no triumph, just relief, raw and trembling. Because this wasn't about being right. This was about life. Viewers, let me ask you, if you had been in Nality's shoes, ridiculed, threatened, accused, would you still have spoken up? Or would you have stayed silent to protect yourself? Tell me in the comments, I want to know. As the antidote continued its work, Alistair's breathing grew stronger. His hand, frail but deliberate, reached for hers. His fingers, cold but alive, curled around her palm. In that simple grip, he declared more than survival. He declared trust. And in that moment, Nality realized something powerful. Being invisible had always been their choice. But being undeniable was hers. But just as peace settled, another storm brewed. Because outside that hospital door, cameras were waiting. The world wanted answers. And Nality was about to discover that saving a billionaire's life would not only change his future, it would change hers forever. Subscribe before the next twist catches you off guard. Because if Nality thought the venom was dangerous, the truth outside that door was even deadlier. Morning light poured into the hospital like a quiet witness. Reporters crowded outside, their voices echoing through the lobby, demanding answers. Security guards held the line. The world had learned that Richard Caldwell, the billionaire once thought untouchable, was alive because of a maid. Inside, whispers carried through every corridor. Staff who once ignored her presence now spoke her name in hushed awe. Nality, the invisible maid who had refused to bow to silence. When she stepped back into the ward, heads turned. Nurses paused mid-chart. Doctors who had dismissed her only hours earlier now shifted nervously, their pride caught between shame and respect. At the foot of the bed, Richard Caldwell rested, his breathing steadier, his skin returning to its natural glow. His eyes opened slowly, scanning the room until they found her again. "You're still here," he murmured. Nality lowered her gaze. "I couldn't just walk away." Silence. Then something unexpected. Dr. Reeves, the very man who once laughed at her suggestion, who threatened her with removal, stepped forward. He bowed his head, his voice heavy with humility. "We were wrong," he said, his words trembling. "All of us. You saw what none of us would even consider. And you saved him. For that, we owe you more than we can ever repay." One by one, the others followed. Heads bowed. Some in shame, others in gratitude. The mockery, the sneers, the humiliation, gone. In their place, acknowledgement. For the first time in her life, Nality wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. But respect isn't just given. It's earned. And she had earned it through courage most people never find. Marcus Thornwell, the quiet brother who had stood by her side, moved closer. You didn't just save him, Nality. You reminded all of us what integrity looks like. When it mattered most, you chose truth over fear. Her throat tightened. Because the truth was, she hadn't done it for recognition. She had done it because she couldn't live with silence, not when silence meant death. Viewers, let me ask you this. How many times have you stayed silent when you saw something wrong? Would you have risked everything, like Nality, knowing you might be blamed? Comment below. I want to hear your truth. Outside, the cameras still flashed. But inside, something deeper shifted. Nality's story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. Alistair's voice broke the moment. Weak, but steady. From this day on, she will never be just the maid. She is the reason I live. And she deserves the same respect we give anyone who carries this hospital's name. The room held its breath. Nality's eyes filled, though she fought to hold them back. Respect had never been her goal. But hearing it spoken aloud, undeniable, felt like a weight finally lifted from her shoulders. The invisible Maid was invisible no more. Her story wasn't just survival. It was transformation. And for you watching now, remember this. Being unseen is not the same as being powerless. One voice, one choice, can change everything. If this story moved you, don't just leave. Subscribe now, because the next story may hold the lesson you've been waiting for. The room was still heavy with silence when Richard Caldwell lifted his hand, motioning for Nality to come closer. Every eye followed her as she stepped to his bedside, her heart pounding louder than the monitors. He struggled to sit up, his voice hoarse but steady. You saved me, not just with medicine, but with courage. I owe you my life. Nality shook her head. You don't owe me anything, sir. I only did what anyone should have done. A faint smile touched his lips. But they didn't. You did. He reached for her hand, surprising everyone in the room. Tell me what you want. Anything. Money. A house. A career. Name it. Her throat tightened. For years, she had imagined a moment like this, someone finally noticing her, finally offering her a chance. But now, standing here, she realized what she wanted most wasn't wealth or luxury. I only want respect, she said softly. For people like me. For those who clean your floors, wash your dishes, carry the weight no one else sees. I want them to be treated as human beings, not shadows. The room stilled. Even the doctors shifted uncomfortably, their pride exposed. Alistair studied her with eyes that seemed sharper now than ever. Respect is your right, not a reward. But you deserve more. Much more. Nality opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a finger. No. You risked everything while others stood by. You will not leave this hospital the same way you entered it. I won't allow it. He turned his gaze to his brother Marcus. See to it. Whatever she dreams of, make it happen. No shortcuts. Nality's chest tightened. Gratitude warred with fear, fear of hoping too much. Dreams had betrayed her before. Poverty had crushed them until they felt like foolish fantasies. But Richard's words carried a weight she couldn't ignore. This wasn't empty charity. It was a promise. And sometimes, a promise can rewrite a destiny. Viewers, let me ask you this. If you were in Nality's place, would you dare to ask for more, or would you settle for less, just to stay humble? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you'd choose. Richard squeezed her hand one last time. You gave me life again. Now it's my turn to give you yours back. And in that moment, Nality realized her story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. The next morning, the hospital buzzed with a different kind of energy. Not the quiet despair of a dying billionaire, but the rising hum of something rare, hope. Nality woke in the small on-call room where she had been allowed to rest. For the first time in years, her body felt light. Not because her problems had disappeared, but because for once, someone powerful had spoken her name with respect. When she stepped into the corridor, Marcus Caldwell was waiting. In his hand, a sealed envelope. "My brother asked me to give you this," he said, his voice steady but warm. She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she broke the seal. Inside was a letter, written in Alistair's careful handwriting. It read, "Nality, you once dreamed of medicine, but the world told you it was impossible. Let me be clear, that world was wrong. I am funding your full education, tuition, housing, books, everything. You will not lift a mop again unless you choose to. You will not be invisible. You will walk into classrooms as a student, into hospitals as a doctor, and into the world as a woman who refused to be silent. This is not charity. This is justice." Richard Caldwell. Her vision blurred with tears. For years, she had buried the dream of following her mother's path, strangled by poverty and humiliation. She had taught herself in secret, reading cast-off journals, memorizing case studies she could never afford to study formally. And now, the door that had been slammed shut in her face was not just opening, it was being flung wide. She pressed the letter to her chest, her heart pounding. This was it, the miracle she had once stopped praying for. But miracles come with responsibility. The doctors who once mocked her now nodded with respect as she passed. Nurses whispered her name like a story already becoming legend. Even security guards gave her a small smile, as if to say, "We see you now." Nality stood taller, not because of pride, but because of purpose. She whispered to herself, "I won't waste this." Viewers, imagine this. After years of being overlooked, someone finally gives you the chance you thought was lost forever. Would you take it? Or would fear hold you back? Tell me in the comments, because your answer might be the mirror of your own life. By evening, arrangements were already in motion. Richard's lawyers contacted the medical school. Marcus insisted on handling the logistics. Dr. Reeves offered personal mentorship. His earlier arrogance softened into respect. Nality returned to Richard's bedside one last time. He was sleeping peacefully now, color in his cheeks, strength slowly returning. She placed her hand gently on his arm. "You gave me more than life," she whispered. "You gave me back my dream." For years, she had believed that being invisible meant being powerless. That no matter how hard she studied, no one would ever take her seriously. But now, she understood the truth. Invisibility doesn't mean irrelevance. Her dream, once crushed, was reborn. And the girl who scrubbed floors in silence would soon wear a white coat, not because it was given to her, but because she fought for it. Because courage had rewritten her story. Subscribe if you believe no dream is ever too dead to be reborn. And share this video so others remember that the world cannot bury true purpose forever. But what if fear had silenced her? Think about it. How many lives are lost because invisible people are ignored? If Nality had swallowed her words that night, if she had let pride, fear, or the weight of rejection bury her voice, Richard Caldwell would have died. His story would have ended in silence, not hope. And isn't that what happens every single day in our world? People at the bottom see things, know things, sense things. But no one listens. Their voices get brushed aside, their warnings dismissed, their potential wasted. Viewers, let me ask you, how many miracles have we buried just because they came dressed in janitors' uniforms or taxi drivers' caps, or the quiet voices of people we refuse to notice? History is full of genius minds silenced by poverty, full of healers who never had the chance to study, full of visionaries crushed under arrogance. But Nality refused to stay silent. She risked ridicule, humiliation, even her job, to step forward and say, "You're wrong. I see the truth." And that single act of courage reshaped everything, not just her life, but the life of one of the most powerful men in the city. Now ask yourself, in your own life, how many times have you kept quiet when you should have spoken? How many times have you seen the answer, but doubted your own worth to share it? Here's the haunting reality. Every time fear silences us, the world loses something irreplaceable. A cure never found. A dream never lived. A life never saved. This isn't just Nality's story. It's our story. The invisible walk among us every day. In classrooms where teachers overlook them. In workplaces where bosses dismiss them. In neighborhoods where voices go unheard until tragedy forces attention. And the question that lingers, the question you cannot ignore, is this: how many lives will be lost if we keep looking away? Would you have listened to Nality? Or would you have been like the doctors who mocked her, the security who dismissed her, the world that labeled her just a janitor? Be honest with yourself. Because if we can't answer that question with courage, we become part of the silence that kills. This chapter isn't about the billionaire. It's about you. Yes, you watching this right now. You've felt invisible before, haven't you? You've had moments when your voice shook, when you doubted anyone cared, when the world made you feel too small to matter. That's why I'm asking. If you've ever felt invisible, subscribe right now. Only the arrogant look away. And if you won't subscribe, then comment why. Tell me why you'd stay silent. Tell me why you'd walk past the elitists of the world without hearing them. Because silence is easy. But courage? Courage is what changes stories. Nality proved that. And maybe, just maybe, you're being called to prove it too. Nality's story doesn't end with riches or titles. It ends with something far rarer: recognition. The world saw her at last. The invisible maid, the one who scrubbed floors while the important people walked past, became undeniable. And it wasn't just because she saved a billionaire's life. It was because she chose to act when no one else would. She didn't have a white coat. She didn't have a degree, a badge, or a fancy title. What she had was courage, and that was enough. The hospital slowly returned to its rhythm. Machines hummed. Nurses whispered in corridors. Doctors resumed their rounds. But something had shifted. The ones who mocked her now nodded with a hint of respect. The ones who dismissed her glance more carefully. And Nality? She walked through the halls differently, no longer unseen, no longer just a shadow in the background. Her triumph wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving the world wrong about her. And here's the lesson. Greatness doesn't always wear credentials or carry power. Sometimes it scrubs the floors. Sometimes it delivers water or wipes sweat from a patient's brow. Sometimes it quietly notices what everyone else misses, until courage brings it to light. The irony is sharp. The people who thought themselves superior, who believed authority alone granted wisdom, were the ones nearly responsible for tragedy. And the one they ignored, the one too small to matter, became the difference between life and death. The moral is simple, but it's a hard truth. The world underestimates the invisible at its own peril. Nality went on to continue her studies, and every time she looked at herself in the mirror, she didn't see a maid. She saw someone capable of changing the course of a life. Someone whose quiet hours of learning, whose patient observation, whose relentless curiosity mattered more than any title ever could. And she never forgot that night in the hospital. The fear, the doubt, the moment when silence could have killed not just one life, but many. She understood now that being invisible isn't about weakness. It's about the chance to rise, to act when the world refuses to see. Her courage didn't just save Richard Caldwell. It reminded everyone watching that life is not a game of who wears the fanciest badge. It's a game of who cares enough to notice, who dares enough to speak, who refuses to stay silent when silence lets evil win. So here's the truth, plain and simple. The invisible carry power. The unseen hold influence. And the quiet can change everything. If you believe kindness is the greatest wealth, hit subscribe. Don't walk past the invisible. Don't ignore the quiet. Stand with courage. And if not, comment why you'd side with the villains who never see the invisible. Why you'd close your eyes and let fear or arrogance decide who matters and who doesn't. Because the choice is yours every single day. Nality made hers. And in that choice, the world saw what it had been missing all along.